Rosa Martinez wiped down the same table for the third time that evening, even though it was already spotless. This was her routine at Giovanni's Italian restaurant, and she had perfected it over the past 3 years. Move quietly, clean efficiently. And most importantly, stay invisible. The wealthy customers who came here didn't want to notice the staff. They wanted their food to appear magically and their plates to vanish without any human interaction. At 28, Rosa had mastered the art of being nobody. She could refill a water glass without the person even looking up from their conversation. She could clear an entire table while the family continued their dinner discussion about vacation plans to Europe. Her uniform was always pressed, her hair always pulled back in a neat bun, and her smile was always ready when someone finally did acknowledge her presence. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was because she had been working double shifts all week. Or maybe it was because she had received another email from her mother back in Colombia asking when she would visit. Either way, Rosa felt more tired than usual as she watched. The evening's customers enjoy their expensive meals and loud conversations. The restaurant was busy as always. Table 12 had a couple celebrating their anniversary with a bottle of wine that cost more than Rosa made in a week. Table 15 hosted a business meeting where 3 men in expensive suits talked about their latest real estate deals. And Table 8 had a family of 4 who barely looked up from their phones long enough to order their food. Rosa moved between these tables like a shadow. She had learned to read people's needs before they even realized what they wanted. The businessman at Table 3 always needed extra napkins because he was a messy eater. The elderly woman at Table 7 preferred her water with extra ice. The young couple at Table 9 would ask for the check exactly 30 minutes after their main course arrived. These small details had become her world. She knew the habits of the regular customers better than they knew themselves. Mr. Peterson came every Tuesday and ordered the same pasta dish. Mrs. Chun always requested a table by the window and left exactly a 15% tip. The Rodriguez family visited every Friday night, and their youngest daughter always asked for extra bread rolls, but none of these people knew anything about Rosa. They didn't know that she sent most of her tips back home to support her mother, who worked as a seamstress in a small Colombian town. They didn't know that she lived in a tiny studio apartment where the heating barely worked in winter. They didn't know that she had been saving money for 3 years to bring her younger brother to America so he could attend college. Most importantly, they didn't know about the piano. Every evening, as Rosa cleaned the dining room after closing time, she would pause at the beautiful black piano that sat in the corner. It was a gorgeous instrument, clearly expensive, but it served no purpose other than decoration. The restaurant owner had placed it there years ago because he thought it made the place look more elegant. Sometimes customers would comment on how nice it looked, but Rosa had never seen anyone actually play it. She would dust its polished surface carefully, running her cloth along the smooth wood and occasionally touching the keys with her fingertips. The piano was always perfectly tuned, even though nobody used it. Rosa wondered if the owner had someone come in regularly to maintain it, or if good pianos somehow stayed in tune on their own. During her cleaning routine, Rosa would sometimes find herself standing next to the piano for longer than necessary. She would look at the keys and remember things she tried hard to forget. Her fingers would hover over the black and white keys, almost touching them but never quite pressing down. She was afraid that if she made even the smallest sound, someone might hear her and ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. The other restaurant staff knew very little about Rosa's life outside of work. They knew she was reliable, always on time, and never complained about extra shifts. The kitchen staff appreciated that she never mixed up orders or forgot special requests. The other servers respected her because she never tried to steal their better tables or their regular customers, but Rosa kept her personal life completely separate from work. During break times, while other employees talked about their families or weekend plans, Rosa would sit quietly in the corner, usually reading a book or reviewing her English vocabulary. She had been working hard to improve her English, taking online classes late at night after her shifts ended. The manager, Tony, often praised Rosa's work ethic. She was the kind of employee every restaurant owner dreamed of having. She never called in sick, never argued with customers, and never caused any drama with coworkers. Tony had offered her a promotion to shift supervisor multiple times, but Rosa always politely declined. She said she preferred to keep things simple and just focus on doing her current job well. What Tony didn't understand was that Rosa was afraid of standing out. She had learned that being invisible was safer. When people noticed you, they started asking questions. They wanted to know about your past, your dreams, your plans for the future. And Rosa's past was complicated in ways that most people wouldn't understand. Every night, Rosa would take the same route home from work. She would walk past the music store on 5th Street, where beautiful instruments sat displayed in the window. Sometimes she would stop and look at the pianos, guitars, and violins, but she never went inside. The store owner, an elderly man with kind eyes, had noticed her stopping by and had once waved at her through the window. Rosa had smiled and waved back, then quickly continued walking. Her apartment was small but clean. She had furnished it with items from thrift stores and yard sales, making it as comfortable as possible with very little money. The walls were bare except for one small photograph of her family back in Colombia. She had a tiny kitchen where she cooked simple meals, usually rice and beans with whatever vegetables were on sale that week, but the most important thing in Rosa's apartment was something that wasn't there. In the corner where most people might put a television or a bookshelf, Rosa had left an empty space. Sometimes she would sit in her single chair and stare at that empty corner, imagining what might fill it someday if things were different. Late at night, when the city was quiet and her neighbors were asleep, Rosa would sometimes sit at her small kitchen table and move her fingers as if she were playing an invisible piano. Her hands would dance across the table surface, pressing imaginary keys in complex patterns that seemed to come from deep inside her memory. These silent concerts were her secret, something she had never shared with anyone, the rhythm of her restaurant. Work had become predictable and safe. Every morning she would arrive exactly 15 minutes early to help set up for the day. Every evening she would stay until every table was clean and every chair was properly placed. And every night she would walk home past the music store, past the empty corner in her apartment, and past the dreams she had carefully locked away. Tomorrow would be another day of invisible service, another day of being nobody special, another day of wiping tables and refilling water glasses while wealthy customers lived their important lives around her. Rosa had accepted this routine as her reality, never imagining that sometimes the most ordinary moments can suddenly become extraordinary, and that the people we overlook might be the ones with the most amazing stories to tell. Rosa's story began long before she ever stepped foot in Giovanni's restaurant. 20 years ago, in a small town outside Bogota, Colombia, she was known by a completely different name to the people who mattered most. They called her the Miracle, Child, the Gift, and sometimes simply our little pianist. Back then, Rosa's hands were soft and her fingers moved across piano keys like they were born to make music. Her father, Carlos, had been a factory worker who saved every peso he could to buy his daughter a small second-hand piano when she turned 7. The piano was old and some keys stuck, but to young Rosa, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She would sit at that piano for hours every day, teaching herself simple songs and eventually creating her own melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her heart. The town's music teacher, Senora Lopez, heard Rosa playing one afternoon. When she was walking past their small house, she stopped in her tracks, unable to believe that such beautiful music was coming from a child who had never taken a formal lesson. Senora Lopez knocked on the door and asked to meet the young pianist. That meeting changed everything. "This child has a gift that comes once in a generation," Senora Lopez told Rosa's parents. "She needs proper training, real lessons, and opportunities to perform. If you let me teach her, I promise you she will go places you never imagined." Rosa's parents were simple, hardworking people who had never dreamed of anything beyond their small town. But they could see how their daughter's face lit up when she played piano, how she seemed to come alive in a way that nothing else could make happen. They agreed to let Senora Lopez teach Rosa, Even though they couldn't afford to pay for lessons, for the next 8 years, Rosa's life revolved around music. She would wake up at 5 in the morning to practice before school, then rush home too. Practice more before dinner. Her fingers grew strong and nimble, and her understanding of music deepened in ways that amazed everyone who heard her play. She learned to read complicated sheet music as easily as reading a children's book. By the time Rosa was 12, she was winning every local piano competition. Her name became known throughout the region as the young girl who could make a piano sing like an angel. People would travel from neighboring towns just to hear her play at local festivals and church events. Her parents would watch from the audience with tears in their eyes, hardly believing that their daughter had such an incredible talent. When Rosa turned 15, something even more amazing happened. She won the National Youth Piano Competition in Bogota, beating out hundreds of other talented young musicians from across Colombia. The prize was a full scholarship to study at the prestigious Colombian National Conservatory of Music, the most famous music school in the country. Se Ora. Lopez cried when she heard the news. "Rosa, my dear child, this is your chance to become everything you were meant to be. At the conservatory, you'll study with the best teachers in South America. You'll perform in real concert halls and maybe even travel to Europe or America to continue your studies." Rosa's parents were incredibly proud, but also worried. The conservatory was in the capital city, far from their small town. Rosa would have to live away from home, in a world they didn't understand. But they knew this was their daughter's dream, and they couldn't stand in her way. For 2 years, Rosa thrived at the conservatory. She studied under Master Alberto Viga, one of Colombia's most respected piano teachers, who had studied at Juilliard in New York. He told Rosa that she had the potential to become an internationally recognized concert pianist. "Your technique is perfect," he would say, "but more importantly, you have something that cannot be taught. You have a soul that speaks through music." Rosa made friends with other talented young musicians from around the world. She learned to play pieces by famous composers like Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and Debussy. Her performances at student recitals were so moving that even the most experienced professors would stop their other work to listen. She was being prepared for auditions at top music schools in Europe and America, but then, during Rosa's second year at the conservatory, everything changed in a single phone call. Her father had been working extra shifts at the factory to help support her studies, even though her scholarship covered most expenses. One evening, while working late, Carlos suffered a massive heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, but the doctor said his condition was very serious. He needed expensive surgery and months of treatment that the family's basic insurance wouldn't cover. Rosa took the first bus home, her heart breaking, as she watched her strong, hard-working father lying weak and pale in the hospital bed. The medical bills were enormous, more money than her family had ever seen. The doctors said that without proper treatment, her father might not survive. "Go back to school, Mia," her father whispered to her one afternoon. "Don't let my problems ruin your dreams. You're meant for bigger things than this small town." But Rosa couldn't leave. She couldn't pursue her dreams while her father's life hung in the balance and her family faced financial ruin. She made the hardest decision of her life. She withdrew from the conservatory, packed up her dreams, and came home to take care of her family. For the next 3 years, Rosa worked multiple jobs to pay for her father's medical treatments. She cleaned houses in the morning, worked at a local restaurant in the afternoon, and gave basic piano lessons to children in the evening. Every peso she earned went toward doctor bills, medications, and keeping the family house. Her father eventually recovered, but the experience had changed everything. The family was now deep in debt, and Rosa's mother had developed health problems from the stress. Rosa realized that her family needed her more than she needed her dreams. She made the difficult decision to look for opportunities to earn more money, which led her to apply for a visa to work in the United States. The day before leaving Colombia, Rosa sat at her childhood piano one last time. Her fingers moved across the keys, playing the piece that had won her the national competition years earlier. But now, instead of hope and excitement, The music was filled with sadness and sacrifice. "I'll come back to music someday," she whispered. To herself, though deep down she wondered if that day would ever come. In America, Rosa found work as a restaurant server, a job that paid better than anything she could find in Colombia. She sent most of her earnings back home to support her parents and help pay off the remaining medical debt. She told herself that this was temporary, that once her family was stable, she would find a way back to music, but years passed and the dream felt further away each day. Her fingers, once soft and nimble from hours of piano practice, became rough from restaurant work. Her mind, once filled with beautiful melodies, was now occupied with table numbers and order tickets. The girl who had once been called the miracle child had become invisible, just another immigrant working hard to survive in a foreign country, yet sometimes, late at night, Rosa would still hear music in her dreams. And sometimes, when she was cleaning that beautiful piano at Giovanni's, she could feel her old self stirring, waiting for the right moment to return. Friday evening at Giovanni's restaurant was always chaotic, but this particular Friday felt different from the moment Rosa walked through the staff entrance. The entire restaurant had been reserved for a special event, a charity fundraiser for the city's symphony orchestra. Rosa had seen many wealthy gatherings during her 3 years at the restaurant, but tonight the dining room was filled with people who seemed to think they owned the world. Tony, the manager, had called an emergency staff meeting that afternoon. "Listen up, everyone," he said, adjusting his tie nervously. "Tonight's crowd is extra important. These people donate millions to the arts every year. They expect perfect service, and I mean perfect. No mistakes, no delays, and definitely no attitude. Smile, stay quiet, and make them happy." Rosa had worked extra shifts all week to prepare for this event. She needed the overtime pay because her mother's medications had gone up in price again. She was already exhausted before the evening even began, but she put on her best smile and got ready to serve tables full of people who would spend more on wine than she made in a month. The guests began arriving at 6 o'clock, and Rosa immediately noticed how they carried themselves. These weren't just wealthy people. They were the kind of wealthy people who expected the entire world to revolve around them. The women wore jewelry that probably cost more than Rosa's annual rent, and the men spoke loudly about their latest business deals and vacation homes in places Rosa had only seen in movies. Table 7 was particularly demanding. A group of 4 couples had claimed the best spot in the dining room, right next to the decorative piano. The men were all business executives who seemed to compete with each other over who had the most expensive watch or the biggest yacht. Their wives spent the evening taking photos of their food and complaining about everything from the temperature of the room to the spacing between tables. "Excuse me, server," one of the men called out, snapping his fingers at Rosa like she was a dog. "This wine is too warm. Bring us a new bottle and make sure it's properly chilled this time." Rosa checked the wine. It was served at exactly the right temperature, but she smiled politely and said, "Of course, sir," right away. Throughout the evening, Rosa noticed how these guests talked about supporting the arts and the importance of culture in society. They discussed the symphony orchestra like they personally owned it, debating which pieces the musicians should perform and which guest conductors were worthy of their attention. They threw around names of famous composers and expensive concert halls, trying to impress each other with their knowledge, but Rosa also noticed how they treated the restaurant staff. They never said please or thank you. They interrupted conversations to demand immediate attention. They acted like the servers were invisible unless they needed something. One woman actually waved her hand in Rosa's face while Rosa was taking another table's order, as if Rosa was just a machine that could be turned on and off. The worst moment came around 9 o'clock. Rosa was carefully carrying a tray of expensive wine glasses when one of the men from table 7 stuck his foot out slightly as she walked by. Rosa stumbled but managed to keep the glasses from falling. The man laughed and said to his friends, "These people need to watch where they're going." Rosa's face burned with embarrassment and anger, but she kept walking. She had learned long ago that fighting back would only make things worse. She needed this job, and she couldn't afford to lose it over one rude customer. As the evening continued, Rosa found herself thinking about her life in Colombia. She remembered how people used to look at her with respect and admiration when she played piano. She remembered being introduced at concerts as the talented young Rosa Martinez. Instead of being called the help or simply ignored completely, the breaking point came during dessert service. Rosa was refilling water glasses at table 7 when she overheard their conversation. They were discussing a young pianist who had recently performed with the symphony orchestra. She was technically perfect, one of the women said, but she had no soul, no real understanding of the music. These young musicians today, they can play the notes, but they don't feel anything. That's exactly right, agreed one of the men. Real musical talent is so rare. You either have it or you don't. Most people will never understand what it means to truly connect with music. Rosa's hands began to shake as she poured the water. These people, who had treated her like dirt all evening, were sitting next to a beautiful piano talking about musical soul and talent. They had no idea that the invisible server standing right next to them had once been called one of the most promising young pianists in South America. The conversation continued as Rosa tried to focus on her work. They discussed their favorite composers, their opinions on different performance techniques, and their plans to attend upcoming concerts. They talked about music like it was something precious and important, something that deserved respect and understanding. But not one of them had shown respect or understanding to any human being in the restaurant that evening. Rosa finished her shift at 11 o'clock, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. The guests had finally gone home, and the other staff members were cleaning up and getting ready to close. Rosa volunteered to stay late and help with the final cleaning, even though she was exhausted and her feet hurt from standing all day. As she wiped down tables and swept floors, Rosa found herself moving slower and slower. Her mind kept returning to the conversation about musical talent and soul. She thought about her father, who had worked so hard to support her dreams. She thought about Senora Lopez, who had believed in her so strongly. She thought about Master Alberto at the conservatory, who had told her she had something special that couldn't be taught. Most of all, she thought about the girl she used to be, the girl who could make a piano sing, who could move people to tears. With her music, who had dreams bigger than any small town could contain. By midnight, Rosa was alone in the dining room. The other staff had gone home, and Tony had locked up the front of the restaurant before leaving through the back door. Rosa should have left too, but something kept her in that quiet, dimly lit room. She found herself standing in front of the piano, the same piano she had dusted and polished countless times over the past 3 years. Tonight it seemed to glow under the soft restaurant lighting. Rosa had never touched the keys. She had always been too afraid of what might happen if she did. But tonight, after hours of being treated like she was nothing, after listening to wealthy people discuss the importance of music while showing no respect for the people serving them, Rosa felt something break inside her. All the years of holding back, all the dreams she had buried, all the music she had locked away, it was all pushing to get out. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the piano lid. The keys looked perfect, pristine white and black rectangles that seemed to be waiting for her. Rosa sat down on the bench, her heart pounding so hard she was sure someone would hear it. Even though the restaurant was empty, she placed her fingers on the keys and felt 20 years of memories flooding back. This was the moment everything would change. Rosa's fingers touched the piano keys for the first time in 3 years, and it felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. The keys were cool and smooth under her fingertips, exactly as she remembered from her childhood piano back in Colombia. For a moment, she just sat there, letting the familiar feeling wash over her. Then she pressed down on middle C, and the single note rang out clear and perfect in the empty restaurant. The sound was so beautiful and pure that Rosa almost started crying. She had forgotten how much she missed this simple connection between her fingers and music. She began with a scale, just like Senora Lopez had taught her 20 years ago. Do. Re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Her fingers moved slowly at first, remembering the positions they had practiced thousands of times. The muscle memory was still there, buried under years of restaurant work, but waiting to be awakened. Rosa played a few more scales, then some simple chord progressions. Her hands were shaking with emotion, but they remembered exactly what to do. It was like riding a bicycle after years of not cycling, awkward for a moment, then suddenly natural again. What Rosa didn't know was that she wasn't completely alone in the restaurant. David Chun, the symphony orchestra's conductor, had forgotten his reading glasses at table 12 during the charity event. He had driven back to retrieve them and was using his key to the front door when he heard the piano music. David had been a professional musician for over 30 years. He had conducted orchestras all over the world and had heard some of the most talented pianists alive. But something about the music coming from Giovanni's dining room made him stop in his tracks. The playing was tentative at first, like someone testing the waters, but there was something special about the touch and timing. He quietly pushed open the door and saw Rosa sitting at the piano, her server's uniform still on, her hair still pulled, back in the same neat bun she had worn while serving his table earlier that evening. David recognized her immediately. She had been professional and polite when she served his dinner, but he hadn't paid much attention to her at the time. Now, he watched in amazement as Rosa began to play something more complex. She had moved on from scales to a piece he recognized, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. But she wasn't just playing the notes. She was making the piano sing with emotion that seemed to come from deep inside her soul. David stood frozen in the doorway, hardly believing what he was hearing. This was the same server who had quietly refilled his water glass earlier, the same woman who had been treated rudely by several guests throughout the evening, and she was playing Chopin with more feeling and technical skill than many professional pianists he knew. As Rosa played, years of suppressed emotions poured out through her fingers. She thought about her father lying in the hospital bed, about leaving the conservatory, about all the dreams she had given up. She thought about the customers who had treated her like she was invisible, about the years of loneliness and hard work, about the girl she used to be who could make people cry with her music. The Chopin piece built to its emotional climax, and Rosa's playing became more passionate and powerful. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision and grace, creating melodies that seemed to tell the story of her life. The music filled the empty restaurant with beauty and sadness and hope all mixed together. When she finished the piece, Rosa sat in silence for a moment, breathing heavily. She had forgotten how physically and emotionally demanding real piano playing could be, but she had also forgotten how alive it made her feel. How complete she felt when she was making music. That's why she heard the footsteps. Rosa spun around on the piano bench and saw David Chun walking toward her, his face full of amazement and confusion. She recognized him immediately. He had been at table 12, one of the more polite customers from the evening. But she had no idea who he really was. "I'm sorry," Rosa said quickly, standing up and closing the piano lid. "I didn't mean to. I was just cleaning and I thought I should go." "Wait," David said, holding up his hand. "Please don't go. I'm David Chun, and I conduct the City Symphony Orchestra. What I just heard was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that?" Rosa's heart was pounding. She had been caught, and now she would probably lose her job. "I'm just a server," she said quietly. I used to play a little bit when I was younger." David shook his head. "No, that wasn't playing a little bit. That was professional-level performance. You played the Chopin piece with more emotion and technical skill than most concert pianists. Please tell me about your musical background." Rosa looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just created such beautiful music but were now rough and calloused from years of restaurant work. "It doesn't matter," she said. "That was a long time ago." "It does matter," David insisted. "I've been a professional musician for 30 years, and I know extraordinary talent when I hear it. Would you would you play something else for me?" Rosa hesitated. Part of her wanted to run away, to pretend this had never happened. But another part of her, the part that had been buried for so long, was desperate to play more music. "I don't." "No," she said. "I haven't played in years." My fingers aren't what they used to be. Your fingers are perfect, David said. Please, just one more piece. Rosa looked at the piano, then back at David. Something in his eyes told her that he understood music the way she did, that he knew what it meant to have music living inside you. Slowly, she sat back down at the piano. This time, she chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, one of the most technically challenging pieces she had ever learned. It was also one of the most emotionally powerful pieces ever written, and Rosa poured everything she had into it as she played. David pulled out his phone and began recording. He knew that no one would believe this story unless they could hear it for themselves. He also knew that this was one of those rare moments when you discover something truly special. The Rachmaninoff piece was intense and dramatic, requiring incredible technical skill and deep emotional understanding. Rosa's performance was flawless, but more than that, it was deeply moving. She played like someone who had lived through real pain and joy, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and still find beauty in the world. When she finished, David was wiping tears from his eyes. I don't have words for what that was. You have to tell me your story. How did you end up working as a server when you can play like this? Rosa looked at her hands again, then up at David. For the first time in 3 years, she saw someone looking at her with respect and genuine interest. Not as a server, not as someone invisible, but as a person with value and talent. It's complicated, she said softly. I have time, David replied. And I think your story is going to change both of our lives. Neither of them noticed that David's phone was still recording and that in a few hours, the video would be uploaded to social media and begin spreading across the internet at incredible speed. Rosa's life as an invisible server was about to end forever. Rosa woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. She had worked until almost 2 in the morning, talking with David Chun about her musical background and her journey from Colombia to Giovanni's restaurant. After he left, she had barely slept, her mind racing with emotions she hadn't felt in years. The first text message was from her coworker Isabella. Rosa, you need to see this right now. Check Facebook. Rosa grabbed her phone and opened the social media app. What she saw made her heart stop. The video David had recorded was everywhere. It had been shared thousands of times overnight, and the comments were pouring in from people all over the world. This gave me chills, wrote one person. I can't believe this beautiful music was coming from someone who society treats as invisible. This is what real talent looks like, said another. Not the fake stuff we see on TV, but genuine emotion and skill. I'm crying, wrote a third commenter. This woman has lived through real pain, and it shows in her music. This is art. Rosa's hands shook as she scrolled through hundreds of comments. People were sharing their own stories of hidden talents, of dreams they had given up, of times when they felt invisible. The video was being called "The Server Who Shocked the World" and "Hidden Talent Revealed." By noon, the video had over 1 million views. Local news stations were calling Giovanni's restaurant, asking for interviews. Rosa's phone rang constantly with numbers she didn't recognize. She was terrified and confused, unsure of what any of this meant for her life. David Chun called her that afternoon. Rosa, I hope you're ready for this because your life is about to change in ways you never imagined. I've been getting calls all morning from music directors, talent agents, and reporters. Everyone wants to know about the server who plays piano. Like an angel. I don't understand, Rosa said. I'm just a normal person. I work in a restaurant. Not anymore, David replied. I have a proposition for you. The symphony orchestra is performing next month, and I want you to be our featured soloist. I want you to play that Rachmaninoff piece for a real audience. Rosa felt dizzy. I can't do that. I'm not ready. I haven't performed in front of people in years. You're more ready than you think, David said. But if you're nervous, I can arrange for you to have lessons with the best piano teachers in the city. There are people who want to sponsor your musical education, Rosa. They've been calling me all morning. That evening, Rosa went to work at Giovanni's as usual, but everything was different. Customers who had never noticed her before were asking if she was the piano lady from the video. The staff treated her like a celebrity, and Tony, the manager, could barely contain his excitement. "Rosa, we're booked solid for the next month," Tony said. "People are coming here hoping to hear you play. Would you consider performing for our guests sometimes?" Rosa was overwhelmed. She had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, and now suddenly everyone wanted to see her. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. Over the next few days, Rosa's story continued to spread. News websites picked up the story, and she was invited to appear on morning television shows. A wealthy businesswoman named Patricia Williams, who had been at the charity dinner that night, came forward with an offer to pay for Rosa's musical education. "I was one of the people at that dinner," Patricia said during a phone call. "I'm ashamed to say I barely noticed you while you were serving our table. But when I saw that video, I realized I had been in the presence of extraordinary talent without even knowing it. I want to make up for that by helping you return to music." Rosa met with Patricia the following week. Patricia was nothing like the demanding customers Rosa was used to serving. She was kind, respectful, and genuinely interested in Rosa's story. "I've made a lot of money in my life," Patricia said, "but I've never had the chance to help someone with a gift like yours. I want to establish a scholarship fund for you to study music again. You deserve the chance to develop your talent properly." Meanwhile, David Chen was working behind the scenes to arrange Rosa's debut performance with the symphony. He had convinced the orchestra board to add a special concert to their schedule, featuring Rosa as a guest soloist. "I've never done anything like this before," David admitted to Rosa during one of their meetings. "But I've never encountered talent like yours either. You have something that can't be taught, the ability to make people feel something real through music." Rosa began taking lessons with Dr. Helen Kim, one of the city's most respected piano teachers. Dr. Kim had taught at prestigious music schools and had worked with world-famous pianists. "Your technique is remarkable for someone who hasn't played seriously in years," Dr. Kim told Rosa after her first lesson. "But more importantly, you have a musical soul. That's something I can't teach. Either you have it or you don't. And you definitely have it." As Rosa prepared for her debut concert, she found herself thinking about her family in Colombia. She called her mother and told her about everything that had happened. "Mia," her mother said, crying over the phone, "your father and I are so proud of you. We always knew you were special, but we're amazed at how you've helped our family and still found your way back to music." "I want you to come to my concert," Rosa said. "I want you to see what your daughter can do. We wouldn't miss it for the world," her mother replied. The concert was scheduled for a Saturday evening in November. The Symphony Hall, which seated 2,000 people, sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. People from all over the country bought tickets to hear the server who became a star. On the night of the concert, Rosa stood backstage in a beautiful black evening gown, her hands shaking with nerves. She could hear the audience settling into their seats, and she knew that among them were her parents, who had flown in from Colombia, as well as many of her co-workers from Giovanni's restaurant. David Chun found her backstage. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I'm terrified," Rosa admitted. "What if I make a mistake? What if I disappoint everyone?" "You won't," David said. "You're not just playing piano tonight, Rosa. You're telling your story. You're showing the world that extraordinary people exist everywhere, sometimes in the most unexpected places." When Rosa walked onto the stage, the audience gave her a standing ovation before she even played a note. She sat at the beautiful concert grand piano and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, she felt like that scared little girl from Colombia again. Then she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The music that filled the concert hall that night was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. Rosa played the Rachmaninoff piece that had made her famous, but she also played pieces that told her story, a Colombian folk song her grandmother had taught her, a piece she had written herself about leaving home, and finally, a triumphant piece that spoke of hope and dreams coming true. When she finished, the audience was on their feet, many of them crying. Rosa looked out at the crowd and saw her parents in the front row, tears streaming down their faces. She saw her coworkers from the restaurant cheering and applauding. She saw strangers who had become invested in her story, people who had been inspired by her journey, but most importantly, she saw herself not as an invisible server, but as Rosa Martinez, the pianist who had found her way back to music against all odds. Today, Rosa performs with symphony orchestras around the world. She has established a foundation that helps immigrant workers pursue their dreams, and she regularly returns to Giovanni's restaurant to play for the staff and customers who supported her journey. Her story has become a reminder that extraordinary talent can be found in the most ordinary places, and that it's never too late to rediscover the dreams that live inside us all.